What were you doing at age 6? William's James Sidis was writing books in 7 different languages. Once a nationally known child prodigy, William Sidis disappeared and lived a life of obscurity. So what really happened to the smartest man who ever lived? And how did a man with an IQ estimated to be 100 points higher than Einstein's fall to the depths of failed potential? It all started on April 1st, 1898, when a couple by the name of Boris and Sarah Sidis gave birth to a boy in a hospital in the bustling powerhouse of New York City. Boris and Sarah were brilliant Ukrainian Jewish immigrants that strived for a better life in the United States. Boris was a psychologist who would quickly become well known within the academic realm of hypnosis and mental disorders, and Sarah was one of the only women with a medical degree during the time. With the combined brilliance of the two, producing a smart child wouldn't be very difficult, but they wanted more. They wanted a genius and would do everything within their power to make this dream come true. In the early days of William's life, Sarah quit her job as a physician to dedicate all of her time and energy to molding William into a prodigy. Life savings were used to buy books, supplies, and anything that could be used to accelerate William's learning. With Boris's psychology techniques, William could pronounce letters within a few months and used words like door at 6 months old. For reference, most babies say their first word between 12 to 18 months old, and even then, the word is usually just a simple mama. By 8 months, he could feed himself with a spoon, and by 2 years old, he could read the New York Times and type letters on a typewriter in his high chair in English and in French. His unheard of development was fulfilling for his parents, but it seemed like he was just a pawn in a chess game. You see, through all this time, his parents, Boris specifically, were testing techniques on their son and churning out research papers to show off his success. It's almost as though William was a lab rat with no purpose other than to test the boundaries of human intelligence. By 7 years old, along with his high school diploma, he had mastered French, German, Latin, Hebrew, and Russian, and he even made his own language called Vendergood. Rather than enjoying the precious moments of childhood, his parents had other plans in mind. His parents weren't the only ones interested in him, as he was accepted into Harvard at 9 years old, making him the youngest student ever to enter Harvard up until today. Despite admitting him to Harvard, the school administration cited emotional immaturity as a reason to prevent him from coming, while his parents went to every media source, including the New York Times, to provoke outrage among scholars and anyone interested. He worked on finding errors in Einstein's theory of relativity. His parents pressed harder and harder until Harvard finally gave in and allowed Sidis to attend at the age of 11. While most students at his age had to worry about entering middle school, he had to worry about giving a dissertation on the fourth dimension. This topic of four-dimensional bodies is actually what brought his name to the media. His understanding of the subject shocked highly educated Harvard scholars, and he became a national sensation. For the rest of his time at Harvard, reporters harassed him and classmates made fun of him. William once admitted that he had never kissed a girl to Harvard classmates, to which he was teased and relentlessly made fun of. Despite his lonely and painful time at Harvard, he eventually graduated cum laude at 16. This was where he foreshadowed the beginning of his downfall, when he told reporters, "I want to live the perfect life. The only way to live the perfect life is to live it in seclusion. I've always hated crowds." But we'll come back to that later. Because of the relentless bullying Sidis had to endure from the Harvard students, he ended up convincing his parents to let him leave Harvard to go become an assistant professor at Rice University. Mind you, all at the age of just 17. But after teaching 3 different classes and writing an entire textbook for one of the geometry courses in Greek, Sidis apparently chose to leave his job after less than a year. Now, even though he cited frustrations with the department, teaching requirements, and his treatment by students older than himself as the reason why he left, when a friend later asked him why he had really left, he told him the sad truth. "I didn't leave. I was asked to go." Yet somehow, Sidis managed to get back into Harvard, this time completely ditching his dreams of mathematics and instead choosing to study at Harvard Law. But after 3 hard years of learning, studying, and becoming so incredibly close to attaining his degree in law in 1919, just like he had done time and time again, Sidis quit. Only this time, Sidis really stopped caring about anything and started to go completely off the deep end. Because right after he dropped out of Harvard Law, he decided that his real purpose on this earth was to spread the marvels of socialism to the world. He started spreading his message, attending meets, and even leading protests. But after one particularly violent socialist protest on the streets of Boston, William Sidis was arrested by the police and taken to court. So, just a few weeks after he took his final steps out the gates of Harvard, he found himself walking right back into the gates of prison for 18 months. Well, that's what would have happened, as the judge was not very fond of socialism, nor was he fond of the violent nature of Sidis' protests. But as always, Sidis' parents came to his rescue and made a deal with the district attorney so that he would be kept in a mental hospital that they owned for a year, instead of 18 months in prison. Yet again, even after all of this, his parents were still dead set on reforming young Sidis, saying that if he didn't go back to college, they would send him to an insane asylum. But having been completely fed up with not only his parents, but the education system as a whole, as soon as Sidis got the chance, he ran away from everything he had and fled across the country to New York City. After all, as Sidis had once said just a few years earlier, the only way to live the perfect life is to live it in seclusion. Sidis survived New York as well as anyone could. I say anyone because even though Sidis was the smartest man in the world at the time, had gone to Harvard, was an assistant professor at Rice, and spoke 7 different languages, he made sure that any job he took would require absolutely none of the brainpower that he had spent his entire life developing. Any menial task, from shoe shining to operating adding machines to working the cash register at local convenience stores, Sidis was more than happy to do so, knowing that he was living his dream life by being completely secluded. But don't let his choices of jobs fool you. When he wasn't shining shoes or ringing up customers, Sidis would go home and write dozens and dozens of books, yet only publish them under his many pseudonyms in order to stay completely anonymous. Whether it be cosmology, American history, anthropology, or transportation systems, Sidis just couldn't stop learning and dispensing his knowledge, as he'd always done. In fact, in one of his books that he wrote during his 4th year on the run, The Animate and the Inanimate, he came to the breakthrough discovery that there were regions of space where time goes in reverse and would not emit light, essentially theorizing the universe had black holes completely on his own. Years and years passed of this repetitive lifestyle, doing brainless, menial jobs in the day and postulating genius new theories at night. But one day, at the age of 46, Sidis' brain, the focus of his entire life, suddenly started to bleed out into the rest of his body. And with that, the world's greatest mind was gone forever. Despite having so much intellectual potential, today, Sidis remains nothing more than an obscure memory. Despite Sidis being engineered from birth to be the smartest person humanly possible, all we know Sidis as now is the incredibly gifted child who never used his gifts. Sidis had always wanted to live a perfect life, and yet, in his own words, the only way to live the perfect life is to live it in seclusion. Yet, now that he's gone, it's clear that his abandonment of his family, school, education, and society as he knew it wasn't simply to be secluded from people he knew. It was to be secluded from the terrible life of pressure, expectations, and disappointment that everyone in his life had always given him. After all, if you're told from birth that you're the smartest person to have ever lived, you've only got 2 options: become that person or become a disappointment. In many ways, Sidis did both. But if we can learn one thing from Sidis, perhaps it's just that the only way to live the perfect life is to live it in seclusion. Seclusion from any expectations, pressure, anger, or complexity. Even though Sidis may not have lived the perfect life in anyone else's eyes, to him, once he was finally able to let go of the pressure that had been haunting him for his entire life, he was finally free to live the life of his dreams.